I can see our participant numbers are, our attendee numbers are going up, so we'll just wait a few minutes, well, 20, 30 seconds. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone as you're joining us. I can see that attendee numbers are increasing, but I think we should get started. First, I'd just like to start by welcoming you all to this joint webinar hosted by the All Party Parliamentary Group for Africa and the All Party Parliamentary Group for Human Rights. And I'd also like to welcome anyone joining us by the Facebook live stream of the Royal African Society. It's fantastic that technology can bring us together in these circumstances to consider what is such an important and also a timely subject. So my name's Chion Wara, and I am the Member of Parliament for Newcastle upon Tyne Central, and I also have the great privilege of chairing the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Africa, and that's a cross-party group of UK parliamentarians, so that's from both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and we come together to facilitate mutually beneficial relationships between Africa and the UK, and also as part of that to challenge the negative stereotypes which unfortunately still persist in certain circumstances with regard to Africa. And this is the second event in our series exploring environmental and human rights accountability of UK companies and investors in supply chains. And it builds on the All-Party Parliamentary Group's previous event in 2019, looking at the challenges of holding UK extractive companies, so mineral, oil, etc., legally accountable for environmental disasters caused by their activities. And I do particularly want to sort of welcome the other parliamentarians from the Lords and the Commons who are on this webinar with me, and I hope we'll be hearing from them later. But first, we will hear from our panel of speakers, which is an international panel joining us from the UK, Liberia, and Peru, and making the case for introducing legislation to better hold UK companies accountable when they fail to prevent human rights and environmental abuses in their supply chains. And this is, an incredibly topical and important subject right now. I think it's been growing in importance as over years, indeed decades, globalization has meant that so many of our supply chains have become longer and longer. But it's also particularly important now as the UK leaves the European Union, looking to trade relationships, improve and increase trade relationships with other countries, and as we see the role that modern day slavery, exploitative practice, anti-union laws, all these practices can play in modern supply chains to goods and services, indeed, which are part of all of our lives. And so in looking to for the introduction of legislation, it's worth recognizing that similar laws are in place in France, they're under discussion in Switzerland, Germany, and Finland, and the European Union is consulting on a law to be introduced next year, which would apply obviously to UK businesses operating in the UK, but no longer to the UK as such. I'm pleased to say that we have two translators joining the call today who will be doing a simultaneous translation from English to Spanish and Spanish to England during Brice Perez's presentation. So please ensure you are on the correct channel, and please can everyone try to speak slowly, let me do it myself, and clearly to aid translation. And at the bottom of the screen there's a global shaped translation icon, and participants can select their language channel there. And before we get started, there's two more things. If you're not speaking, please do mute yourself. That will help with, obviously, with the communication. And if you'd like to ask a question after the initial presentation, please use either the chat box or raise the hand function. And just to say that as an all-party parliamentary group meeting, priority will be given to, in the first instance at least, to members of parliament and peers. And let me just actually also add that as a member of parliament, I will be voting in about 10 minutes. So I will disappear and I will hopefully ask a fellow parliamentarian to take the chair seat for the 20 minutes or so I will be gone. But so with all of that housekeeping, and also an emphasis on the importance of this debate and the timeliness of it, let me first hand over to Mark Dearn, who is the Director of Core Coalition, the UK's long-standing corporate accountability network. He's also a board member of the European Coalition for Corporate Justice and a decade of experience campaigning on issues spanning human rights and sustainability. So, Mark.
Thanks very much, Chi. Yeah, my name is Mark Dearn and I'm the Director of the Core Coalition. As Chi mentioned, we're the long-standing corporate accountability network in the UK. We have more than 50 partner organisations spanning NGOs, trade unions and law firms. And since our founding, we've been involved in securing legislation, including the 2006 Companies Act, the EU's 2014 Non-Financial Reporting Directive, and the 2015 Modern Slavery Act's Transparency and Supply Chains provision. Today, on behalf of our coalition, I'd like to tell you about the urgent need for new legislation for a law that combines the process of mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence for business with liability for failing to prevent human rights and environmental harms. The need is urgent because companies which facilitate or turn a blind eye to human rights and environmental abuses overseas are not being held accountable. Allegations of human rights abuses in the supply chains of UK companies are serial and ongoing. Research has shown they cover half of companies listed on the FTSE 100, that they span the world, and that they cover sectors including the apparel industry, mining, and private security, and with abuses ranging from unsafe working conditions to illegal land grabs and the dumping of toxic waste. The UK is rightly proud of its action in legislating on business and human rights. The 2015 Modern Slavery Act was one of the first laws of its type. However, what we're asking for would expand and deepen the provisions in the Modern Slavery Act. Notably, this Monday, the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, Dame Sarah Thornton herself, wrote that calls for the introduction of mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation are increasing, and that, I quote, if companies or sectors show no willingness to reform, the argument for making organizations liable for their decisions becomes increasingly compelling. And that is precisely what we are calling for in our call for new legislation. And it would go beyond supply chain transparency rules with no real sanctions to hold businesses responsible for their involvement in abuses. And it would also go beyond forced labor and trafficking alone to coverage of all human rights abuses and environmental harms. As such, it would also go beyond the government's recent welcome proposal for due diligence on products to ensure they are not associated with deforestation, which at present, and it is in its very early stages, has no scope for the inclusion of human rights, legal liability, or coverage of all sectors and sizes of business. In so doing, a new law would enable us to live up to our commitments made a decade ago next summer under the 2011 United Nations Guiding Principles, the unanimously endorsed framework to ensure businesses respect human rights, states protect them, and crucially, and unfortunately too often lagging behind, that victims have access to remedy for abuses they suffer. Just going to share some slides now. So as these slides show, in 2019, more than 20 organisations came together in the UK to call for a new law to help tackle the reality of British business involvement in human rights abuses and environmental harms around the world. And we made this call immediately after a 2019 Supreme Court ruling in the case of Ngoe versus Vedanta, which locked in the increased understanding in English common law that parent companies can have a duty of care for the actions of their overseas subsidiaries, which are repeatedly linked to human rights abuses and environmental harms. The law we would like to see introduced is a law that will meet investor demand and bring much needed clarity on and certainty on human rights and environmental responsibilities to business. This should be understood in the context of legal certainty and clarity as foundational principles of the rule of law. At present, and as these slides show, responsible businesses, those which voluntarily choose to adhere to international environmental standards and human rights law, are being punished. They lack a level playing field and will continue to be punished without one. And through myriad laws and processes, domestic and international, judicial and non-judicial, UK businesses lack clarity and certainty on what their obligations are. And, as this slide shows, the view of investors is clear and concise. Governments need to put in place mandatory human rights due diligence measures. Such a law with such due diligence measures would meet public demand for new laws to tackle corporate bad behaviour and to build back better after COVID-19. More than 70% of the British public across all age groups believe we must do more to tackle bad behaviour by business. Polling has also separately found that most younger Leave voters want big business regulation to increase or stay the same, and that 2/3 of people want the government to intervene to create a fairer economy after COVID-19. Crucially, we already have an existing template for such a law. Section 7 of the 2010 Bribery Act, which can find companies liable for failing to prevent bribery, and which includes the defence of putting in place adequate procedures designed to prevent this from happening. This is a law widely understood to have had a huge impact on how bribery and corruption compliance is now viewed by companies operating in the UK. We believe our human rights and environment should be held to the same standard. And as this slide shows, in 2017, Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights called on the government to bring forward legislation modelled on the Bribery Act to introduce an offence of failure to prevent human rights abuses for all companies, alongside a requirement of putting in place human rights due diligence processes, including, crucially, provisions for civil and criminal remedies when abuses do occur. As this final slide shows, this year the British Institute of International and Comparative Law asked whether this would be legally feasible. And their answer was yes, provided it is aligned to the provisions of the UN Guiding Principles already committed to by the UK, and that it includes a defence.
Mark, you finished?
To conclude, sorry.
To conclude, okay.
Such a failure to prevent law would bring the UK up to speed with an emerging domestic and international consensus reflected in political parties and states increasingly calling for or committing to bring in their own such laws. Notably, in spring 2021, as Chi mentioned, the EU bloc will table its own legislative proposal for a mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence law. At present, and in line with the EU's desire for ensuring a level playing field for business in the EU, the law is intended to apply to all businesses operating in the single market, regardless of where they are domiciled and regardless of trade deals being in place. That would include all UK businesses operating in the EU, which would then create a two-tier system in the UK of businesses obliged to do this and those which are not, serving to only amplify issues of clarity, certainty, and a level playing field. So after almost 10 years since we committed to the UN Guiding Principles, we need to match our commitments with action. As we look to build back better, and as other states act, the UK faces a choice, to lead or to follow. It is the core coalition's belief that we must live up to commitments we have already made, and in so doing create new rules to ensure a fairer, greener UK and world. A new law comprising of mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence and legal liability to ensure remedy for victims of abuse can help fundamentally change corporate culture for the better. It can stop responsible businesses from being undercut by the irresponsible, and it can help bring a long overdue end to an era of corporate impunity around the kind of environmental and human rights abuses linked to British business that you will now hear more about. And I'd like to hand over to colleagues from the Global South who will explain more about the type of abuses they have suffered in their countries.
Mark, thank you very much. Chi has had to dash for her vote. And I hope Baroness Lola Young will be able to take over to chair until she comes back. But so as not to delay, then I suggest we move straight on to Bryce Perez, who is originally from the Canos River Basin in Amazonas, Peru, and has been the PAMUC, which is the president of the Autonomous Territorial Government of the One Piece Nation since 2015. and he studied in Spain and will speak in Spanish. And there will be, for those of you who've clicked on the English interpretation on the button, you will get the simultaneous translation into English. He has a long history of leadership in his community, having been a councillor in the Rio Santiago municipality and the Association for Indigenous People of the Peruvian Amazon. And I will ask him now, Bryce, please, to take the floor and give us your perspective from the Global South on what is happening. So over to Bryce, and we'll listen to the interpretation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muchísimas gracias. Muy buenas tardes para Europa, muy buenos días aquí en Sudamérica, en territorio One Piece igual. Bryce Pérez, PAMUC, del Gobierno Territorial Autónomo de la Nación One Piece. Muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad de saludar a todos los distinguidas autoridades del Parlamento del Reino Unido, también a los que nos acompañan para este panel. La Nación One Piece está ubicado en la parte fronteriza de Perú y el Ecuador. Aquí vivimos miles de años nosotros. Estamos ubicados entre las cuencas del Morona y del Santiago de manera milenaria. Tenemos una extensión geográfica de 1.327.760 hectáreas. Vivimos más de 15.500 One Piece en este territorio que nuestros antepasados nos legaron. Desde aquí podemos nosotros contribuir con el bosque hacia la humanidad. Nosotros, desde hace más de 20 años, hemos empezado pensando en un territorio integral, pensando en un autolideramiento, y finalmente nos autoproclamamos como Gobierno Territorial Autónomo de la Nación One Piece el 2015, en noviembre. Desde allí hemos empezado a trabajar para hacer el mapeo histórico-cultural de nuestro territorio. Hemos hecho la zonificación territorial autónoma de nuestro territorio. Hemos presentado el expediente técnico-jurídico al Parlamento del Perú para que tenga conocimiento que aquí existimos desde antes que existe el Estado. Hemos hecho trabajos de reuniones para poder hacer que conozcan este trabajo de nosotros, defendiendo la naturaleza, que es fuente de vida para nosotros, pero también para la humanidad. En este espacio, nosotros podemos contribuir desde hace miles de años, capturando oxígeno malo para convertir en oxígeno bueno para la humanidad, 100.000 millones de toneladas al año. Es una contribución que hemos venido haciendo desde hace miles de años, no desde hace poco. Sin embargo, hace unos años atrás, sin haber hecho la consulta del gobierno del Perú y sin consentimiento de nosotros, una empresa chilena denominada Geopar se ha ubicado en territorio One Piece Achuar. Nosotros hemos empezado a presentar documentos para decirle que no estamos de acuerdo, porque ninguna empresa en la Amazonía ha tenido buenos resultados hacia nuestros bosques, simplemente han contaminado nuestros bosques, y por eso es que nosotros hemos dicho no a esta empresa petrolera, Geopar. Miren, fíjense que en plena pandemia, declarado cuarentena por el gobierno nacional, hemos descubierto a funcionarios del Geopar trasladándose por nuestro territorio, generándonos una amenaza, pudiendo contagiarnos de esta pandemia que es muy peligroso para los seres humanos. Nosotros hemos hecho un pronunciamiento, nos dijeron que era falso esa noticia, sin embargo demandamos a la empresa Geopar Incluso el año pasado hemos ido hasta la misma sede de la Geopara Chile para decirle que no estábamos de acuerdo con esta actividad petrolera porque tenemos secuelas negativas en otras partes de la economía del Perú. Hay derrames permanentes de petróleo en nuestro país, donde el Estado peruano no ha invertido ni un sol para remediar esos territorios donde se dice que es el pulmón del planeta. Sin embargo, no se hace nada para este pulmón que está enfermo. Por eso es que nosotros coincidimos con las cumbres climáticas que hacemos anualmente, donde los estados hacen y solo se dicen discursos, pero no se hace nada para el pulmón del planeta. Nosotros consideramos que estas inversiones que se hacen desde las grandes capitales no es más que lo que hacen es contaminar nuestros bosques, contaminar nuestras fuentes de vida que son las aguas. Y creo que es importante decir hoy que no estamos de acuerdo con eso. No estamos contra el desarrollo, simplemente estamos diciendo que no se siga contaminando en nuestros bosques, porque estas actividades no son amigables con la naturaleza. Por eso era importante decirlo hoy y decirlo también después, pero igual. Entonces, estas inversiones que salen de los bancos multilaterales, donde se guardan mucho dinero, pero si contaminamos este bosque, ese dinero no va a servir para nada, porque de aquí, de esta tierra, se produce comida para todos, para todo el mundo, para Europa, para África, para todo el continente. Si contaminamos esta tierra, no va a servir nuestro dinero, porque la plata no se come. Lo que se come es lo que se produce en esta tierra, pero no se está respetando a la madre naturaleza. Eso es lo malo que se está haciendo. Por eso le exhortamos a los inversores, a los que dan dinero a estas empresas petroleras extractivas, que primero tienen que ver a dónde van a invertirse esta plata. No sea que sigamos contaminando este ambiente bueno, estos bosques, y nuestras generaciones van a tener mucho tiempo para seguir viviendo y ya no va a haber especie humana en esta tierra. Esa es una preocupación para los One Piece. Y eso quería compartir con ustedes. Hay que trabajar, hombres y mujeres, en este planeta para hacer algo para que este planeta siga existiendo para nosotros y para las generaciones que se nos vienen. Eso quería compartir esta mañana. Muchísimas gracias por escucharme. Buenos días.
It's Lola Young here, just stepping in for Chi whilst she's off voting. And I'd just like to say thank you very much to Bryce for that presentation. And I'm sure there'll be questions from other participants during the course of the afternoon. So thank you very much for your contribution there. It's my pleasure now to introduce James Otto, who is the Programme Coordinator for Friends of the Earth and the Sustainable Development Institute. So James, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, like I'm being introduced. My name is James Otto, and I work for the Sustainable Development Institute and SDI, and we are the Liberian chapter.
James, I can't hear you. Are you on mute by any chance?
Not on mute. Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
no, I still can't.
I can hear you. Okay.
The
James.
rest of us can hear him, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry, I can't hear, so I'll just wait.
Lola, are you on the English channel?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure why that is.
I think, James, carry on and we'll try and sort out Lola's.
Thank you. So, so the Sustainable Development Institute, SDI, is a non-governmental organization based in Monrovia. And then we work closely with communities in rural areas in Liberia. Our focus is to kind of support those communities to actualize their rights as containing Liberian laws, but also into international frameworks. And like I said earlier, we are the Liberian chapter of Friends of the Earth International, so we are part of this global network of environmental rights-based organization. We work closely with communities and companies to ensure that natural resources are managed sustainably and fairly. So our ideal is to ensure that resource extraction benefits the ordinary citizen, ordinary people, and does not provide harm for them. We focus more on land rights and broader human rights. In agriculture. Our attention is drawn to agro-commodity, or palm specifically in Liberia. Our work is intended to hold corporations and the government to account to ensure that they themselves are in compliance to national laws, but also into international best practices and laws. And so this presentation, I want to bring forth an Equatorial Palm Oil, which is an oil palm company that has been operating in Liberia. And the history has changed specifically. Until recently, until June 2020, EPU was headquarters and registered in London, and it's on the AIM Stock Exchange. And so EPU has up to 14,000 hectares of land, and that has been allocated to them by the government, and 8,307 hectares of that land has newly been planted since 2014. And the EPU is also a subsidiary Libinco, and Libinco is an oil company with co-owning ownership by the Malaysian oil palm giant KLK. So that's the idea about a little background about Equatorial Palm Oil. Since their inception into Liberia and from 2019, not 2019, but 2009, 2010 up to 2014, the communities in which the company is situated have witnessed a lot of different irregularities and Liberian laws, international laws, but also reaching out to abuse of human rights and violation of their rights. One of the things we've seen over the years is inadequate compensation and broken promises. So the companies, as a means of getting communities to give consent into their request for land, they make promises that are unrealistic, promises that they are unable to fulfill, promises that in actuality would not happen in real life. And so they made those promises, and with the idea that if the community gave their land, and that's the end of the deal. So for example, I will give a classic example. When EPU decided to take an additional land from communities in Manitown, in Taloustown, in Morstown, in Wisetown, they kind of said to the communities, your cash crops will be paid, particularly the rubber crops that community had on the land. We will pay you up to $97 per tree. And the communities, based on that figure, based on that amount, they made a consent to give the land to the community, to the company. When the company cleared the land, then the company said, no, hang on, the government has changed the price for $97 to $6. We think those are unrealistic promises that the company made to take away land from community. In some instances, they actually grabbed the land without any formal consent. In Kwakbuk, in the community that EPU also took away land, and other in Taloustown, and they did not seek any formal consent from those communities. Their land were taken without any formal engagement with the communities, without any formal consent from the communities. And in instances where the communities have come and raised concern about the way their land was being taken, then they use intimidation and coercion. In some instances, they use state apparatus, state army to intimidate and torture. So if you look at the slides that are presented, and if my colleague Tom can show the slide, can share the slides, you will see actually the pickup truck on the picture showing the state security in the company's car. The state security in the company's car that are being used by the company to intimidate and torture community members who've raised issues about we have been consulted properly, and our land has been cleared without us getting just compensation. There's no formal MOU that holds us in connection with the company. And when they raise those issues, then the government will use state apparatus and state security to intimidate them. Even land that are in dispute, where communities are having counterclaims for the land, the company will feel such conflict because they enjoy the benefit. So when the communities, adjacent communities are having conflict about land that are in dispute, the company use that to take a land with them, clear the land and plant their palm and say, look, we can hold an allegiance to any one community. It could be either community B or community A. So we don't have responsibility for that. So all of these things are violation of human rights and land rights that EPU has been able to exercise here in Liberia. Just going beyond that, we see that they've not provided safety measures for workers. So for example, there are chemicals that are being applied to the palm mainly by women and children and young people, to be specific, young people and women. And there are no chemical and protection. There are no hand gloves. There are no nose protection for workers who are there. There are also instances where the communities will work over a period of time, and then their names are not registered. In fact, they are daily hires. They are not employees of the company. So they work as daily hires, and in instances, supervisors and other people will delete their names from their daily work, so they don't get paid for those work. And there's a practice that when you don't get registered for 5 days, even though you may work for 25 days within the month, you don't get paid for the month. So all of those are a violation of human rights and land rights of communities. Based on that, we think the UK as a global leader should do a couple of things and legislate to protect the rights of additional people and the collective right to free, prior, and informed consent. In Africa, particularly, and in Liberia specifically, and our governance system is so weak. So if there are no laws to hold companies accountable outside of their countries, I think, and then the weaker system will get will be used by the companies to continue to do harm, to abuse human rights, and to destroy the environment. There should be robust protection for customary land rights. In Liberia, even though in 2018, Liberia passed a Landmark Land Rights Act, we've seen over the years that the companies and the government are not trying to live by the laws. And so if there are regulations in the company's home, like in the UK, to hold these companies responsible, then the companies are going to behave when it comes to certain parts of the world. There's no accessible grievance and redress mechanism. Even as we speak, the communities just named that they were made promises to give them $97 per one rubber tree, and they got $6 per rubber tree. There's no grievance mechanism within its company or within its state to kind of listen to their plots. So the communities have been crying. They've talked to journalists, national journalists and international journalists over the years, and they haven't gotten any redress. And they've been crying for years. So the laws should also ensure proper enforcement on corporations. And laws are one for one phase, but implementation and compliance is another. So if the UK is going to make laws, to legislate laws to hold the companies accountable, they should really push for proper enforcement on corporations and monitoring them and allowing third-party and people to share and monitoring reports with them at the international level. The legislation is to be based on consultation with citizens and NGO and producer countries. So you're not just making a law to be based in UK that the companies will say, okay, there is a law in the UK that we are part of, but that law should also be based on consultation with citizens and NGOs and producer countries, or allow NGOs and citizens to provide and monitoring information, documentation information to the UK Parliament or the UK government to take appropriate actions. And so, yeah, those were the points I wanted to share, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm back. I'm very sorry. I missed part of what you said. I caught most of it, but I'm very pleased to know that the slides, everyone's slides, will be available, and we can carry on, respond to them, and carry on. I hope this is a discussion that we will carry on in other meetings, as well as hopefully we'll have some time for a discussion here now. So our final speaker is Professor Olga Martin Ortega, who is the Professor of International Law at the University of Greenwich. Sorry, I should also say thank you for Lola for stepping in as the chair whilst I was away. And I would just also want to, one point I did want to make, which I didn't, was that it was very noticeable to me that when Huawei was being challenged about the human rights abuses, particularly in China with the Uyghur, then we had a kind of support, if you like, on the right of politics to have greater transparency in supply chains. And I wonder if that helps drive the, if you like, a growing consensus that a law is required. And perhaps Professor Olga could you respond to that? Yeah, I think you need to unmute yourself, Olga.
Yeah, sorry. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. And well, it's a pleasure and a privilege. I'm going to share my screen now. Let me see, you're sharing your screen. Can you see my screen? I'll try to share again. So I can do a short presentation to you. And I can't see the right screen sharing. I'm not sure why. It worked all right before.
You were sharing, it just needed, here we are. Yeah.
Oh, you can see it now?
Yes, we can see it. Just put it on.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, great. So as we have just seen, this is not just a matter of a remote activities happening far away from where we are. As Pamuk Perez has said, and this is very important, this affects all of us. It's where our food is sourced. It's where our products are produced, where the minerals and the raw materials of where we are, of all the products and services that we consume are produced. And it's the human rights of people and the communities that are involved in this productions. All commercial decisions have consequences on people and their rights, and the communities and the environment in which they are, no matter how far removed they are from the decisions where the decisions are made. So when we demand and we talk about a human rights due diligence law, a mandatory human rights due diligence law, we base it on the minimum and basic requirements that the UN Guiding Principles already established in 2011 to identify, prevent, mitigate, and remediate the adverse human rights impact of business activity and of the commercial partnerships. So we know, and we are proud of the UK having been a pioneer in transparency in supply chain. It's led the way through demanding transparency in supply chain through the Modern Slavery Act, and we all know this, and some of the participants, member of parliaments and peers have been really involved in this. The companies already have this obligation to disclose what are their efforts that they're taking. However, we don't have an obligation to actually undertake efforts to prevent, in this case, modern slavery and forced labor, human trafficking in supply chains. There is disclosure is a corporate-led process. This is corporations decide which information they provide, decide in which formats they provide it, and whether we can have access to public, general public, civil society, victims, member of parliament can have access to all the information to verify and to measure the effectiveness of these measures and their impact. There is no accountability for non-disclosure, and let alone accountability for not having taken the necessary actions to prevent the risks and the human impact. So we need to go beyond, as Marcus said, and as the presentations by Pamuk Perez and Otto and James Otto have shown. And we need a mandatory human rights due diligence law in this case. So what is the substantive element? What's the scope of a mandatory human rights due diligence? What do companies need to do? They need to identify and monitor the human rights risks and impacts. And this include not just the pollution in the Amazon or the specific displacement of people that are going to be relocated because the way a pipe has been drawn. I think like what James has pointed out, how the state colludes with companies on the ground, how companies may intentionally or unintentionally find themselves part of repression and torture, as we have just heard in Liberia. So have appropriate policies, strategies, processes that allow to prevent this risk. So every time we're going to take a company takes a commercial decision, ask itself, what is going to happen in terms of human rights when I take this commercial decision? Identify the risk, and when it's not possible to prevent this risk, mitigate the effects of these decisions. React when violations are found. Victims have a right to redress, and this has already come up, and I will return briefly on this. Companies need to be part of the remediation process, not an obstacle to it. And this is the reality now. the companies are an obstacle to remediation. They obstruct processes of judicial processes, they obstruct investigations. Companies are involved in some occasions in the persecution and intimidation of human rights defenders, environmental defenders, and communities and victims of corporate abuse. So be accountable for the lack of action. There needs to be a clear liability that actually is not just a punishment, it is a deterrence. It is a signal, that a message that the government and this country, the UK states, are sends to companies. We will not tolerate companies in our that operate from the UK or in the UK that actually engage in these activities. Monitor the implementation and measure the effectiveness of the action. Is no use if we put in actions and we don't know what the specific effectiveness is. And report. This is what we have now. Be transparent. Be report and disclose not just the actions but their impact. And very importantly, this has to be a consultative and very participatory process. Stakeholders need to have a voice and a space, not just be the recipient of these kinds of activities, but they need to be part of the design and the implementation of any kind of human rights due diligence. As I said, and Mark has pointed very clearly, and we've heard from James as well, that liability is essential. There has to be consequences for non-compliance. When companies fail to exercise due diligence, they should be exposed to, from administrative sanctions to civil liability. And we've seen that in certain European jurisdictions, there's even criminal liability for a recurrent and persistent failing to establish mechanisms to protect the human rights and react into the harmful effects of human rights, of commercial decisions on human rights. These penalties need to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. It's not just a matter of we'll just pay the fine and keep going, doing what we're doing. As we said, there is a real case for using a system that already works very well in terms of corruption prevention, which is the failure to prevent corruption. And this, if we see the element, is the prevention element that is really poignant in the UK Bribery Act. It's when a company has failed to actually undertake the action that has ended up in a negative consequence. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel, it's there, and the UK has actually been pioneer in bringing it to the international community. And very briefly, on remedies, as I said, states, this is an obligation of the state. It's not just something that we can, as companies, states have an obligation to provide remedy to victims in international law, and the UK has always prided itself for complying with international law. Remedies should include not just judicial remedies, but also operational level mechanisms and non-judicial remedies. And these are, as long as they're legitimate, accessible, and rights compliance, and actually do have the victims at their center. Remediation is not just about compensation, and we've heard from Otto as well. It's not just about cleaning the mess that companies have done. There needs to guarantee non-repetition. This cannot be, this needs to be lessons learned. Currently, legal and practical obstacles are leaving victims without the recourse to redress. And as I said, human rights defenders, whistleblowers need to be protected because they're both being attacked personally, physically, and legally through lawsuits, reverse lawsuits. So as we know, I'm just finishing, the European context is changing fastly. UK companies are going to be subject to transparency and due diligence obligations wherever they operate. There's an urgent need for the UK Parliament to react, to guarantee both justice and accountability. Thank you very much, and I remain at your disposal for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. That was very insightful, and I'd like to thank all the contributors for their presentations. Now we do have a few minutes now for questions, and I have a lot actually myself. But what I'm going to do is see if any particularly firstly any of the parliamentarians would like to raise their virtual hand, or otherwise indicate in the chat, or otherwise that they have a question. I shall give, well, I'll give you a minute, but actually I will ask the question, whilst I'll talk slowly, but ask the question that Lola Baroness Young asked me to ask before she unfortunately had to go, and which has also come in from the floor, and I think reflects sort of my question about the support, about the interest in further legislation following the Chinese examples of human rights abuses, which is really, I mean, it's a big question, I suppose, but it's what do we need to do to build the kind of alliances which get and accelerate the momentum, particularly with influential businesses and within government, as Baroness Young put it, and yeah, and check as a question from Caitlin Pearson, one of our attendees. What do we have to? What are ideas, proposals, suggestions for what we can do to build the alliances and get the momentum that's needed to bring something to the floor, to legislation, to the UK Parliament, and that's about, you know, alliances with those who are influential, sort of as businesses, and also with clearly with our current government ministers, etc. So what I'll do is I'll go in the order in which you spoke. So I'll go to Mark Dearn first, and please, I think we have time for another question after this. So if attendees would like to raise, just check nobody's raised their hand. No. Okay. Fantastic.
Thanks, Chi. I'll kind of split that in two, if that's okay. So on the one side, there's the alliances momentum. On the other side, the question of China and the Uyghurs. On alliances and momentum, that's exactly Core Coalition's kind of food and drink, if you will. That's our role, to specifically build these kind of alliances and momentum. And as I pointed out in my presentation, the perspective from business is already quite established in that there is a lack of clarity and certainty around what the expectations of business are around human rights and environmental abuse. And those slides from the British Institute of International and Comparative Law showed that that stands in the 70 to 80% region around the idea that a new law would bring this clarity and certainty. And we've seen in recent months, especially at EU level, because the legislative proposal is imminent there, that more and more businesses are coming out in support of this kind of law. And as I also mentioned in my presentation, public support in the UK for new laws to tackle company bad behaviour is very high. At the last general election, both Labour and the Lib Dems had commitments to mandatory human due diligence to different extents. And the government's really very recently brought out its proposal on deforestation. You join those dots together and you begin to see that that support is there. And I think it's incumbent on all of us who want to see this law to join those dots together, because the support is there amongst politicians, it's there in business, and it's there in society.
What does joining dots together mean in practice?
Well, it's a very good point. And for us, so for example, we're a campaigning coalition. So that means bringing out these business statements and presenting them to politicians, bringing politicians to those businesses that are aware of this. And also, as we've done today, bringing people like James and Bryce in front of both these audiences to explain what exactly those abuses mean. So there is a pragmatic case there that this is really a legal loophole. There's a gap in the law there. Very quickly on the Uyghur case, clearly that has raised the profile of this whole issue a lot. And we do believe that it's not a wholesale solution to this, but part of the problem is we do need a smart mix, and that's the language of the United Nations Guiding Principles of legislative and policy measures. Obviously, this involves the role of a state beyond just business. But because of the extent of Chinese cotton production, I think 20% globally comes from China and potentially from the Uyghur region. This is something that spans the whole industry. And the current approach to this is to use trade import bans, which can be incredibly effective. But this shouldn't replace or distract from the responsibility of buyers of products, i.e. British companies, to conduct due diligence to identify, prevent, mitigate and remediate risks throughout their supply chains.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've got a question from, which I'll ask the other to move on to specific as well as the previous question from Natalie Bennett, which is, are there ways we can use the law to help constructively develop strong local economies to meet people's needs locally within planetary limits? So, you know, food growing, local manufacturing, etc. Thinking about trading arrangements and reparations. Reparations is often thought of in terms of governments, but companies owe a lot. That's a question. And actually, I have a sorry, using the chair's privilege, I have another question to add to the ones about building alliances momentum, which actually, no, I don't think we've had. Well, certainly when I've been here, I haven't mentioned trade unions. And what is that? You know, what is their role, both in the areas where abuses are taking place, but also in you know, the UK, for example, in terms of identifying and supporting and supporting identifying human rights abuse and supporting their you know, the ending and holding companies to account. So I'm going to ask James, and then yes, well, James is in the order in the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question about building alliances is a very important question, and I think and building momentum around these cases, they are very important. But I think this is just one example. The fact that I'm two persons from the Global South participating in this program today is just a beginning. But I think presenting documented evidence, I mean real visual documented evidence to British MPs, that's going to actually push them to see the kind of harms that are being meted against people. You know, for example, if I show you the picture of Benin Town and the communities and the land area they've got no space for farming anymore because their land has been taken away from them without any proper participatory mapping process, without any proper, arrangement, land use plans where they will farm and eat. I think that's actually going to push people. So I would think building alliance to building alliance and to push momentum to UK MPs is to provide more evidence. And the second thing I wanted to say is, if we start to develop much more small enterprises, particularly in the agriculture sector, small community-driven approaches, I think that's actually going to help. And unless the corporation take huge tracts of land areas, and of course that goes along with environmental issues and human rights issues. But if we put communities in the driving seat and they can now engage into small-scale enterprise development for the basic commodities that are needed in the global north, I think that's going to help. So that would be my input to this question.
Thank you very much. Thanks for we've got most of that, James. And I think the point you're making, particularly in what is our Black History Month, and in the year where Black Lives Matter has taken been such a campaign for putting the voices of the global South, as you put it, first, is something that we should all be focusing on. So actually, is Brice still with us to speak to this? I'm not sure. So I'll ask Olga, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. I think I'll take the point about reparations and where the communities come. And I think this is very important. Reparation itself is not just providing compensation, is not, we took your land, is uninhabitable or not farmable. Oh, here you can be, why don't you be relocated to another place? Or reparation is about redress for the harm, but also to allowing the communities and the people who have been affected by these corporate activities to rebuild their own lives and their own livelihoods. It's not about a substitution. It's about redress and coming back to a situation which people are empowered to live their own life that they were living before. And with regards to this connects with regards to the issue of the trade unions, when I was saying this, both the design of mandatory human rights due diligence strategies and processes, they have to be consultative processes. They have to be processes that take into account all stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders? The workers, the people who represent the workers, which are trade unions in some locations, and worker representative more informally in other locations, which trade unions are be co-opted by the government or not freely allowed. The trade unions, the communities, the community leaders, especially women who tend to be out of the positions of negotiation, and their voice is lacking, women and children, for example, migrant workers as well. So all stakeholders should be part of the design of the due diligence processes, the implementation, the monitoring, because they are the ones on the ground, and of the reparation processes, and overseeing how that reparation is implemented.
Great, thank you very much. And I think we can now hear from Brice. Yes.
Muchas gracias. Sí, yo creo que es una deuda histórica que los estados tienen hacia los pueblos originarios. Europa tiene una deuda histórica a los pueblos indígenas. Nosotros, con una contribución climática hacia el mundo, muchas veces los recursos que se asignan a los estados en desarrollo, en este caso a Perú, no llegan a los pueblos indígenas, que somos los principales, los que contribuimos con el sistema climático para el mundo. Por eso yo creo que desde la Nación One Piece plantearíamos que estos fondos que se asignan a los estados debían de ser dirigidos hacia los propios pueblos originarios para poder trabajar para que siga existiendo el bosque y la naturaleza, repoblar las especies que están extinguiéndose, los bosques que se están deforestando. Hay que reforestar, hay que darle mayor vida al bosque, al planeta, a la naturaleza, a la Amazonía. Allí creo que tiene que mirar Europa para que siga habiendo oxígeno bueno para el mundo, porque si no, como le he dicho en mi presentación, no va a tener mucha vida este planeta, y las generaciones que se nos vienen no va a tener donde vivir. Allí hay que contribuir. Las economías locales tienen que ser contribuidas. Mucha gente piensa que la naturaleza le da algo para poder sobrevivir. No, hay que empezar a ver qué actividades económicas locales hay que empezar a hacer desde nuestra perspectiva propia. Por ejemplo, la crianza de peces. Nuestro territorio está funcionando, pero necesitamos recursos para eso. Entonces es fundamental esas actividades, pero vuelvo a reiterar, Europa tiene una deuda histórica a los pueblos indígenas en América. Tiene que mirar esa Europa y pensar en ello. Los estados de América Latina nos tienen una deuda histórica. Perú está para cumplir 200 años, pero no ha hecho nada para el pueblo One Piece. Hay que trabajar juntos. Necesitamos estar aliados. Nadie trabaja solo. Solo no haremos nada para el planeta. Necesitamos estar aliados todos y todas, jóvenes y viejos. Los que tienen dinero y no tienen dinero, tenemos que trabajar para que este planeta siga existiendo para nosotros y para la humanidad. Muchas gracias.
Many thanks to you, and I think that is a sort of excellent point on which to draw proceedings to a close. We're out of time. We're over time, but we could very easily have gone on for much longer. Certainly, there are many other issues and questions to be addressed, and how we turn you like, I think we've really established as part of this discussion so far, parts which I was part of, hearing from indigenous communities and hearing from those the voices of those sort of impacted by the absence of a law now, and also from the activists and the stakeholder groups and the civil society who are working to bring this about. I think for me, it seems, the time has come, the time is here, and how we do the next steps in terms of translating this, the existing momentum into actually legislation is the critical part. I hope that we can continue the conversation and the debate on this issue. I want to say that we're having our third webinar in this series, will be held in early 2021, and we'll explore receptions of the proposals from private sectors and unions and others. And if you have registered, you'll be sent details closer to the time. If there's interest in raising these issues in Parliament, then please do contact the SAFE All-Party Parliamentary Group for Africa or for Human Rights for more support and information with regard to tabling questions and organising Westminster Hall debates in Parliament for next spring, for example, once the European Union has tabled its proposals. I'd also say that all attendees who have members of Parliament, who are UK residents and have members of Parliament, should get in touch with them and raise the issues sort of raised in this debate and see what their response is. And always helps to engage more parliamentarians in the debate. But I really just want to finish by really thanking everyone who took part in the debate, thanking in particular our panelists, who I think showed, have a range of experience, expertise, and geographic range, which you kind of don't often get in discussions of this type. I'd also like to particularly thank the Royal African Society that provides our secretariat, and I think has done a fantastic job. It's notable that technology in this instance is not being a challenge but an enabler, and that's still not always the case in webinars. So real thanks to all the support that the Royal African Society has provided technically, and also in bringing together this exciting panel. And thanks very much to everyone, and we will keep on the struggle in these difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chi. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.